Rise today on Bill C-22, an act to establish the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. And I think it goes without saying that safety and security of Canadians is one of the top priorities of any government, and I'm sure every member in this chamber would agree with that statement. But Speaker, like many of you, I spent the last few months in my riding, traveling from one end to the other. I spoke with countless constituents and about the importance that about the issues that were important to them. And for many, their highest priorities were, of course, jobs and the economy. And as a Conservative, I'm proud to say our record speaks to itself on those two files. But I also heard from people who were concerned about public safety and national security. Now, across the globe, Speaker, terrorist attacks are taking place and have taken place. And the idea that these types of attacks don't happen in Canada was a common belief a few years ago. But now, when we look at the political landscape, terrorism cannot be overlooked. And as we know, Chair, attacks have taken place in our own country. Plans have been thwarted many times by our brave women and men in law enforcement. And do not misunderstand me, please. I'm not attempting to strike fear into the hearts of Canadians, but I believe that it's important that we are not naive about our place in the world. The most prominent example of this was October 22nd, 2015, or even most recently in August, when our enforcement agencies stopped an attack. There have been attacks across Europe. We see them France, Belgium, Germany, among others, and of course in the United States. And I say all of this because it's important to provide context on what members of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians will have to review. Our law enforcement, intelligence, and military agencies have played a crucial role in keeping Canadians safe. And Madam Speaker, this bill has legislated a committee of specific design. And there are parts of it, I think we agree on the essence of it, but there are parts of it that I think I have issues with. Members on the Conservatives and NDP seem to have the same issues. The committee will consist of a chair recommended by the Prime Minister. The committee will have up to 8 additional members of Parliament, to a maximum of 4 from the government and no more than 2 from the Senate. Members of the committee cannot be a Minister of the Crown, Minister of State, Parliamentary Secretary, and are appointed by the Governor in general on recommendation by the Prime Minister and the leader of the other member's party. The committee is intended to be nonpartisan and highly independent, but yet the Liberal government appointed the committee chair in January before the legislation was even created. This committee will review agencies that were highly specialized and effective in their designated fields. Yet, there is no requirement that the members of the committee have any experience in public safety and security issues. I also find it concerning, Speaker, that the government refused to consult with opposition parties despite the public willingness by the Conservatives and the NDP to discuss this important committee. In fact, our official opposition critic wrote to the minister twice about this committee. The committee, as it's currently written, Speaker, is appointed by and reports to the Prime Minister's office. Speaker, I believe, and I think most believe on this side anyway, that it should be open and reporting to Parliament. The Prime Minister campaigned on a reduced role of the PMO, and we all know actions speak louder than words. The committee is mandated to review the legislative, regulatory, policy, administrative, and financial framework for national security and intelligence. Any activity carried out by the department that relates to national security or intelligence, any matter relating to national security or intelligence that a minister refers to the committee. And I'm going to quote the government's own backgrounder here. The committee would have robust powers to access any information to conduct its reviews, subject to specific limitations, such as to protect third parties, prevent interference in active military operations, and maintain the independence of law enforcement functions. While the committee would have a right to access to information requests, the legislation would allow ministers to withhold special operational information, but only if the disclosure would harm national security. The responsible minister would need to provide the committee with the rationale for their decision to withhold that information. The National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians' findings and recommendations will then be tabled in Parliament. However, and here is where some of the big concerns I have arise. The government, not Parliament, will review the committee's reports before tabling to ensure they do not contain classified information. I find it deeply troubling that C-22 provides for numerous exceptions and permits government agencies and ministries to opt out of providing information for review. This weakens the oversight and does not permit the committee's mandate to be fulfilled. I also find it concerning that the Prime Minister will also basically have a veto on what it reports in this so-called independent committee. Would it not be more appropriate, Speaker, for non-partisan officials or the committee to decide what can or cannot be released? The government in power should not have a veto on what the committee reviews or reports. As with any committee, the chair provides crucial support and direction to the committee as a whole. It is therefore peculiar that a committee of this importance, for a committee that is claimed to be independent and nonpartisan, that the government would have already selected who they are going to appoint to this position. And of course, we know it's the member of Ottawa South, and like all of us, he is political. I have great respect for the member for Ottawa South. There are many members in this chamber that I'm sure would like to be on that committee. I have no doubt, had there been a free election of the chair, he probably would have won. He's very well respected on all sides. But the government will not even give those members the opportunity to select their chair. So what happened to the Liberals' sense of accountability? What happened to their transparency? Real change, they said. However, the chair, as I've mentioned, was appointed before the committee was even struck. There are 7 exemptions under Section 14 in this legislation, including that the committee cannot look at ongoing investigations that may lead to criminal charges. If I'm not mistaken, Speaker, that basically covers every investigation operation of law enforcement and security agencies in this country. It's been made clear that Canada is not the first country to create this type of oversight committee. Many of our allies have enacted similar oversight systems. This includes the British, Australians, New Zealand, and many of which, I won't get into all the details because it's been discussed amongst my colleagues. And I'd like to thank my colleague, the member for Durham and the official opposition critic for public safety, for his work on this important file. The importance of a National Security and Intelligence Committee cannot be overstated. We've heard that throughout the debate. It is therefore critical that legislation be properly drafted. And again, I said earlier, I think we all agree on the essence of this committee. There's just some finer points that need to be tuned up in order to appease people on this side of the House. Now, as I've said before, the Committee of Parliamentarians should not report to the Prime Minister or the government. This is something the Liberals raised many times in the previous Parliament. It is something the Liberals talked about during the election. They said the PMO has too much power. That power needs to be given back to Parliament, they said. And now what do we see with this piece of legislation? No different than any other government before that, just they have the Sunny Ways title to go with that. The government, as it stands now, will have the ability, as I said, to vet and veto the decisions made by this committee. This, therefore, takes away from all the independence claims that the government has made. And in effect, under the current legislation, the committee would be controlled by the Prime Minister's office. Of course, the Prime Minister's office appointed the chair already. And this is an issue, I think, and I hope all members on both sides of this House should agree that the politics should be left out of it. After all, they campaigned on it. And we as parliamentarians need to continue to ensure that our enforcement agencies have the tools and equipment they need to keep Canadians safe. And I'd like to take a moment, if I could, Speaker, to thank the men and women who put their lives on the line every day, and those who currently serve, have previously served, home or abroad, conflict or peacetime. I appreciate their sacrifices. We should never forget. And it's all in the protection, Speaker, of our rights and freedoms. Members of the Canadian Armed Forces, our intelligence agencies, police, firefighters, first responders, we thank you for your service. And Speaker, I see you're giving me the wrap-up sign, so I look forward to questions from my honourable colleagues.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Thank you for my colleague for his speech, and I also share his salute to our good men and women who give their life to save our own. Since they are always relying on the UK, let me share something with this House. In the UK Intelligence and Security Committee, ministers may choose to withhold sensitive information. In Australia, the government cannot be compelled to provide operationally sensitive information. What is so difficult to understand, and some information is so sensitive that by disclosing that may put the very good men and women who protect our life at risk.
Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I thank you for that very good question. I don't think we disagree with that point. I think there is sensitive information that needs to remain that way in order to protect those out in the field doing the important work we talked about before. But I think where the issue rises is that the PMO gets to vet that information. And that is something that we all heard during the campaign. The NDP, the Liberals all stood up during the campaign and said the PMO had too much power. We need to take it away. We need to put it back into Parliament. Okay? So we look at this piece of legislation, and like I said in my speech, it's no different than any other form of government. I'm sure my friend on the other side, had he been on this side, and the previous Harper government put forward this legislation, they all would have been up in arms and yelling and screaming, the world's coming to an end. And yet they've done the exact same thing, except they campaigned on doing things differently, and the real change. So I'd like to take him up on, through you, Chair, take him up on his word, and let's see this real change, and have this committee report to Parliament.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his speech on this issue. I know that we disagree with the former Conservative government when they introduced C-51. In fact, all political parties except the Liberals disagreed with the Conservatives on C-51. There's a real impact on rights and freedoms, but Liberals voted to support C-51, which has left us in a very difficult situation. But now the Liberals have introduced C-22, and I think the member would probably agree with me, as I agree with him, that there are huge flaws in this legislation. That instead of providing the independent oversight that comes from having an independent chair, we have a chair that is chosen by the government and by the Prime Minister, which certainly flies in the face of the way our major allies do this type of oversight committee. And then we have the censorship, both in terms of the information that's permitted to go to the oversight committee and a censorship control of the Prime Minister's office on what comes out of the committee. So instead of having oversight that Canadians can have confidence in, does the member not think that what we have is a very flawed piece of legislation?
Our member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank my friend from British Columbia for that question. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with you. There are very big issues with this piece of legislation, and Speaker, I will quote again from the Liberals' election platform. It stated, "To increase accountability, we will strengthen the role of parliamentary committee chairs, including their election by secret ballot." And that was a pretty big promise. I also will remind, and I think my friend from British Columbia will remember, motion 431 that was passed in the previous Parliament unanimously. The motion is where the members of the chamber unanimously referred to the desire to have elected chairs of committees. And I think that the fact that the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, the member from Wascana, and the member from Ottawa South both voted for that, but yet we see that they're doing completely opposite on what they voted on in the previous Parliament, what they campaigned on, and now we see that they get on the governing side of the House, and their views immediately change just like that. So I think we'd like to see, and I think my friend from British Columbia would agree, we'd like to see some of that real change that they campaigned on. Otherwise, they're no different, and it's just another broken campaign promise.
Resuming debate.